The world of Asterion died slowly at first. Not with fire, but with sound. A deep, unending hum that rose through the earth and settled into the bones of every living thing. It began with the power grids. Lights flickered, machines coughed. The skies dimmed as if the planet itself had drawn a long, fearful breath. Then came the first explosions, small, distant, meaningless. But people still looked up. They always looked up. She was one of them, standing in a broken market square, hands dusted with flour from the bread she'd never sell. Her name was Alara Miles, though that name would soon stop meaning anything at all. The air smelled of metal and ozone. Children ran home. The elders whispered about mining accidents, about failed generators. But Alara heard something different, a rhythm under the noise, like drums from another world. Then the sky tore open. A flash of green light, wrong and raw, split the clouds. Asterion's twin moons vanished behind smoke and debris. From that rift came shapes, jagged silhouettes, too large, too brutal, too alive. No one understood at first. No one could. Alara dropped the bread and ran. The first ships fell like meteors, blunt, armored, burning with wild energy. They struck the city's outer rim, shaking the earth. From within their hulls, they came, creatures taller than men, thicker than armor, voices like engines choking on blood. They laughed as they killed. The planetary guard fought back, but it was chaos. No strategy, no mercy, just screaming, echoing through metal corridors and collapsing towers. Alara hid beneath the wreckage of a tram station. She watched as the invaders stormed through, smashing, tearing, roaring in a language that sounded more like thunder than speech. One of them crushed a man beside her without slowing down, as if life itself was just debris in their path. Days blurred together. There was no sun now, only firelight and dust. People whispered in basements, prayed to anything that might still be listening. Some fled into the tunnels beneath the city, into the dark. Alara followed them. When the creature finally stopped, it shoved her into a group of others, maybe 20 people, bound by rope and silence. The creatures surrounded them, shouting, laughing, fighting each other for sport. One of them raised a severed head to the sky and roared triumphantly. The rest joined in, their voices shaking the air. Alara looked up at that broken sky, and for the first time she realized the truth. Asterion was not dying. It was already dead. The days that followed blurred into a single, endless moment, a waking nightmare painted in smoke and green fire. Alara was herded with the others into a makeshift camp, if it could even be called that. It was less a settlement and more a battlefield that never ended. Piles of wreckage marked territory. Burning husks of vehicles became walls. Bones became trophies. The air reeked of oil, sweat, and blood, and above it all, the guttural laughter of the creatures rolled like thunder. They were enormous, twice the height of a man, thick-muscled and scarred, their skin dark and coarse like metal that had forgotten it was once flesh. They moved with a strange, chaotic order, always fighting, shouting, building, breaking, then fighting again. Their armor was a patchwork of scrap and skulls. Their weapons, too large, too crude, too personal, seemed more like extensions of their rage than tools of war. Alara was thrown into a pen made of twisted steel and wire. There were others, miners, workers, a few soldiers stripped of armor and dignity. The aliens didn't separate them. To them, humans were just bodies. Every morning, if time could still be measured, the captives were dragged out to carry ammunition, clean blood from weapons, or bury the dead. Sometimes human, sometimes alien. The line blurred fast. Alara did what she was told. She didn't look up, but she listened. The creatures had a rhythm to their chaos, a brutal kind of culture. They shouted in their coarse language, and though she couldn't understand the words, she began to feel their meanings. Victory, hunger, death, laughter. Always those four. And above all else, strength. One of them, the one who had dragged her from the tunnels, seemed to notice her more than the others. He was massive, his skin marked with crude symbols cut into the flesh. His left eye replaced with a metal plate bolted directly into his skull. When he passed, the others stepped aside. He was their leader, or something close to it. He called her small. At least that's what it sounded like. Every time he walked past her, he'd grunt the same sound, a name stripped of language. At first she thought it was mockery, but then one day he stopped to look at her, really look, and she saw something behind the monstrous grin. Not kindness, but recognition, like a predator remembering the face of its prey. That night she didn't sleep. She watched the stars through the gaps in the metal fencing. Asterian's once blue sky was gone, now a green haze that pulsed faintly, like the planet itself was still bleeding. She thought of her sister again, the bakery, the smell of warmth and life, and wondered if memory itself would someday rot like everything else. In the distance the aliens feasted. They sang, if it could be called that, a brutal rhythm of stomping and howling, pounding their chests and weapons in time. Fires burned bright, and their laughter carried through the camp. Alara curled into herself. She wanted to hate them, but mostly she hated the silence in her own heart, the part that no longer felt shock or fear or even disgust. On the third week, or maybe the fifth, time had long since dissolved. Something changed. The camp erupted into chaos. The aliens were fighting, not the humans, but each other. Alara saw them tear through their own ranks, massive fists shattering armor, blades carving through thick flesh. It wasn't war. It was sport, a contest. When it ended, only two stood. One was her captor, the one who had named her Small. The other was younger, meaner, eyes burning with challenge. They fought until the ground turned red, until one stopped moving. And when it was over, the leader, her captor, threw back his head and roared, so loudly the metal walls vibrated. He didn't roar in victory. It sounded more like defiance. Then his gaze turned toward her again. That night, when the others were silent, he came to the pen. He didn't speak. He just stared through the wire, breathing heavily. The faint glow of the fires painting his scarred face in flickering orange. Alara met his eyes for the first time. There was no humanity there. But there was something else, something she couldn't name. He pointed at her, then at the ground. Then he walked away. The next morning the guards pulled her from the pen. The others whispered as she passed. some looking at her with pity, others with envy. Anything was better than being forgotten in the dirt. It wasn't cruelty the way humans defined it. To him, pain was truth. Fear was proof of life. He didn't see her as fragile, only unfinished. And sometimes in the dark she wondered if maybe he was right. Weeks passed, or maybe months. The air grew colder. The fires never went out. Asterian's sky remained the color of rot. The other captives began to change too. Some grew silent, hollow-eyed, moving only when commanded. Others broke completely, attacking their masters in futile rage and dying for it. A few started laughing, mimicking the aliens' behavior. Their voices cracked and wild. Ilara didn't laugh, but she stopped crying. She found herself watching Gorik during the feasts, studying his gestures, the rhythm of his commands, the way he struck his subordinates to enforce order. It wasn't random violence. It was hierarchy, structure, their kind of logic. And sometimes when the camp erupted into chaos and everyone shouted, she saw a flicker of something terrifying. Purpose. The aliens weren't mindless. They built. They strategized. They even honored their dead in their own twisted way. They would burn the corpses, then carve symbols into the ash, roaring to the sky in some ritual of victory or remembrance. Ilara stood in the shadows watching. She wondered if anyone would ever do that for her. One night a storm swept across the ruins, black rain, heavy with ash and oil. The fires dimmed. The noise softened. Gorik sat alone by a dying flame, sharpening a blade the size of her arm. His skin glistened with rain. For the first time he looked still. Ilara was nearby, repairing torn cloth. Busy work he made her do to keep her hands from shaking. She looked up and saw him watching her. Not in cruelty, not in dominance, just watching. The sound of the rain filled the silence between them. Then he said something, a short phrase, low and quiet. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was different. It wasn't an order. It wasn't mockery. It was almost curious. When she didn't respond, he repeated it, slower, like he wanted her to understand. She only stared back. After a moment, he grunted, the sound deep and tired, and went back to sharpening his blade. She didn't know why, but that moment stayed with her long after the fire died. Not because it meant anything, but because for a heartbeat she thought he might have been lonely. Days later the war drum sounded again. The horde was moving. The invaders had found another human stronghold, one of the last. Gorik and his warriors roared in anticipation, preparing for battle. The sky shook with engines and thunder. Ilara was ordered to follow. They didn't leave her behind. They wanted witnesses. They wanted eyes. The march was endless. The ground trembled beneath their boots. The world smelled like fuel and death. When they reached the ruins of the human fortress, she saw what they had done. Walls reduced to rubble, towers turned to ash. The survivors inside screamed prayers into broken radios. None were answered. Ilara stood among the alien ranks, covered in mud and soot, staring at what used to be her people. And in that moment she felt nothing. No fear, no sorrow, only a dull, hollow ache. She realized she had forgotten the sound of her own language. When the slaughter began, she didn't look away. She couldn't. Something deep inside her had cracked, quietly, without ceremony. When it was over and the silence returned, Goruk turned toward her. He said that word again, the one he'd spoken in the rain. Then he pointed at the dead. She didn't ask what he wanted. She just started digging, and as she buried the bodies, both human and alien alike, she felt the dirt under her nails and thought of the bakery again, the warmth of the oven, the smell of bread, and how far away that world felt now. Not in distance, but in memory. She wondered if she'd even recognize her sister's face, if she ever saw it again. There was a night when the stars came back, only for a moment, a tear in the endless clouds, a shimmer of cold white light piercing the smoke. Alara looked up and felt something stir in her chest. It wasn't hope, it was memory. For the first time in months, she remembered what stars looked like. The aliens didn't notice. They were too busy preparing for their next war, their next feast. The camp pulsed with motion, drums, fire, and the mechanical growl of their war engines. But Alara stood still beneath the open sky, staring at that fragile glimmer above the ruin. It felt wrong to look at something beautiful. She almost turned away. That's when she saw him. A human soldier staggering through the wreckage beyond the camp perimeter, his uniform torn and burned. He wasn't one of them. He was hers. Her heart stopped. He was wounded, bleeding badly, dragging himself across the mud. He hadn't seen her yet. She wanted to run to him, to speak, to warn him. But she froze, because she knew what would happen next. The alien saw movement before she did. A roar went up, savage, eager. The soldier turned, panicked, and tried to crawl faster. Alara's voice caught in her throat. Goruk barked a command. 3 of his warriors charged forward, weapons raised, their laughter echoing through the ruins. The soldier screamed and then Alara moved. She didn't think. She just ran. The world blurred around her. Rain, fire, screaming. She reached him before they did, dropped to her knees beside him, hands trembling as she tried to pull him up. He looked at her, eyes wide with shock. Human? He whispered, disbelief cracking through his pain. His voice was hoarse, broken, but real. For a second, she saw herself reflected in his eyes. Dirty, hollow, dressed in alien rags, a ghost of what she once was. Then the shadows fell over them. The warriors surrounded her, blades dripping black. Goruk stood behind them, silent. The soldier reached for his gun, and one of them crushed his hand under a boot. He screamed. Alara begged, not with words, just with sound, a raw, helpless noise that scraped her throat. She threw herself over the soldier, trying to shield him, but they dragged her back. The soldier looked at her, not in anger, not in fear, just confusion. He didn't understand why she was still alive. Goruk stepped closer, eyes burning with that cruel curiosity of his. He growled something short and guttural. Alara didn't know the words, but she knew the meaning. Choose, he pointed, first at the soldier, then at her. Her heart stopped. He wanted her to prove it, to show him what she was now. The soldier tried to speak, to plead maybe, but all that came out was blood. Alara's hands shook. She could still smell bread. She could still hear her sister's laughter. And then Gorok threw her a weapon, a crude blade, black and heavy. It landed in the dirt between them with a sound that would never leave her memory. The camp had gone silent. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Hundreds of eyes watched her. Alara picked up the blade. Her fingers closed around the handle. It felt cold. She looked at the soldier, this stranger who still had a human face, still had a human voice. And for one terrible second, she saw herself reflected in him again. And that was what broke her, because she couldn't bear to see what she had become. When she raised the knife, the world disappeared. No sound, no thought, just motion. When it was done, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at her hands, slick with blood, trembling. The aliens roared in approval. Gorok smiled, a horrible, prideful grin, and placed a massive hand on her shoulder. In his eyes, she had finally earned her place. That night they feasted again. The fires burned higher. Alara sat among them, silent, empty, staring at the flames. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She just watched. When the laughter faded and the horde fell into restless slumber, she stood and walked away. No one stopped her. She wandered through the ruins until she reached the edge of the battlefield, where the stars still faintly shone through the smoke. The bodies lay scattered across the mud, silent as stone. She knelt beside one, the soldier, and touched his face. It was cold. He looked peaceful. She whispered, "I'm sorry," though she knew it didn't matter. Then she looked up at the stars again. They were fading, swallowed by cloud. They were collapsing from within. Their hunger had eaten them alive. Alara watched from a distance as chaos consumed the horde. Blades flashing, fire spreading. The noise of destruction louder than any battle she had heard before. She could have run. She could have hidden. But she didn't. Instead, she walked toward it. The air was thick with smoke and screams. She passed bodies, human and alien alike, until she reached the center of the camp. Gorok stood there, bleeding, surrounded by fire. He saw her. For the first time in what felt like forever, their eyes met. There was no hate there, no command, just recognition. Maybe he understood what she was about to do. Maybe he didn't. Alara stepped closer, picked up a discarded weapon from the ground, a black, jagged blade, and held it steady. Her hands didn't shake. Gorok didn't move. He just breathed. Deep, heavy, resigned. Then she drove the blade through his chest. The sound it made was like thunder breaking over water. He staggered, staring at her. Not in rage, not even in surprise. Only silence. Then he fell, and the fires roared higher, as if the world itself was gasping. Alara stood there, covered in blood and light, surrounded by ruin. She felt nothing. No victory, no freedom. Just the weight of everything she had lost. When dawn came, if it could be called dawn, the camp was gone. The aliens were dead or scattered. The sky was still dark, the ash still falling. Asterion was empty again. Alara wandered through the silence, past the wreckage of machines and bones, until she reached a ridge overlooking what had once been her city. There was no sound. No wind, no birds, just the hum of distant fire, She sank to her knees. Her reflection stared back at her from a puddle of black rainwater, unrecognizable. A face carved from grief and grime, eyes too old for the body that held them. She touched the water. It rippled and the image vanished. Asterion was quiet. So was she. For a long time she simply knelt there, the last human on a dead world, staring at a horizon that would never brighten again. Then softly she spoke. "I forgive you." No one answered. No one ever would. She wasn't sure if she was talking to Goruk, to the gods, or to herself. But the words felt real. And when she closed her eyes, she thought she could almost smell bread again. Faint, warm, impossible. The last memory that refused to die. In the end, survival is not victory. It is the slow, quiet death of everything you once were. On Asterion, one woman lived long enough to remember what she had lost. And in that memory, she found her peace.